So as I think you can tell or deduce from Omar's introduction, Anne was the president of the Mark Twain Circle. I was the president of the Mark Twain Circle. She was the editor of the Mark Twain Annual. I'm on the editorial board of the Mark Twain Annual. Anne and I go way back. Right?
It's like Tom and Jerry.
Yeah. I won't tell you any stories, but
I will.
In part because Anne and I have known one another for a long time and organized lots of conferences together and just done a lot of led workshops about Mark Twain here and in a lot of different locations as well. I was asked to write a blurb for the Ghosts of Mark Twain, which I happily did. And then the University of Missouri Press, in its wisdom, chose not to print it on the back cover. And so I thought I would begin by reading you my blurb. The Ghosts of Mark Twain is a creative and compelling act of interpretation. Using unpublished manuscript fragments and excised passages from canonical works, Ryan probes the depths of the writer's psyche, revealing a pervasive pattern of fears and anxieties that shaped both the stories he told and, more importantly, those he ultimately could not. Her ambitious, thought-provoking analysis is sure to spark lively debate, as well as a substantive reassessment of Mark Twain's identity and iconic stature in American culture. So, we're done. That's my take. That's my take on the book.
It shows up on a website.
You do?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, that's good,
okay.
Right?
We're using it.
Was not for naught. So I'd like to begin, Anne, by asking you about the genesis of your book. What was it that inspired you to write The Ghosts of Mark Twain?
Okay, well, this is humiliating, actually, and it's very silly, and this will be the fun portion of the evening. I'm not sure if I have, do I have like a clicker or something for moving the PowerPoint along? It's fine if I don't, but there was a time when I was researching, look at everybody's running now. I could do like hand puppets or something. I could do that, but oh, thank you. Does it? Because I could show a couple images, but I'll start. Could I hold my mic closer? All right. Chances are. Okay. All right. So I came across, and if Omar, if it's easier, I could click it through. But I came across a reference to this novel, written apparently by Mark Twain in 1917, which is a really incredible feat since he died in 1910. And so if you forward it, one more time. Okay. This is the unfortunate and troubled Emily Hutchings. And you'll see that the subtitle is Jap Heron, a novel written from a Ouija board. I know. So what she experienced was that the ghost of Mark Twain was reaching to her from the great beyond, and he dictated this really terrible novel to her. And if you flip ahead, I just hit it again. This is Emily Grant Hutchins. And so she was actually known to Twain, and she had written to him. And she said, as you can see here, I just love this woman. I must write the thing as I see and feel it. She's writing to him about contemporary literary tastes. I am determined to fight it out on my own line. I have no other choice. I need this lesson as I need all the lessons of life. Is it not so? Now, she had written to Twain and said, what do I do when my manuscripts are not being accepted? And he said, well, it's best to just reject them yourself in advance, right? And so I know she didn't catch that he was being vicious, and so she kept writing to him. And she's writing these very purple, kind of loving, needy messages to him. And if you flip it one more time, on the back of the end, oh, you went a little too fast. Oh. I really think I should do this, Omar, right? But on the back it says, idiot, preserve it. So this was Twain's response. And as I did a little more research, and now you can hit it again, I realized there were a group of women who felt that Twain was communicating with him from the dead. One is Eunice Winkler. Now, I have no idea if this is Eunice Winkler. This is how like thorough a scholar I am. I just picked an image of someone who looked like her name should be Eunice Winkler. And she was described as being a charming and intelligent young girl now attending a manual training high school. And she claimed that, and she published her account in Azoff, a psychic journal, and she claimed that Twain was leaving little notes and drawings in her unmentionable drawers. And if you want to flip ahead there, you can see some of the drawings. One more. There we go. Okay. So this is apparently Twain, right? This is, I know, Jeff Nichols is like, this is fantastic. Okay, I see a whole new exhibit starting. But these are supposed to be the spirits of Twain, like that his energy is housed in this like ghost sheet, and that she would open her underwear drawer and find like a message from Mark Twain. And if you hit it one more time, her Twain said things like this: God is real, and so is the devil, and all his demons. Look out for them. Don't let them get you. The only way to escape them is to live pure, speak true, right wrong, follow the God, but fear them not. Remember that God is stronger than all these, and place yourself under his protection. Have faith in him, and no harm can come to you. Don't forget Christ. That sounds like Twain, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, not at all. Right. Okay, and then one more. This is a little later. This is, again, I have no idea if this is who Mildred Burris Swanson is. This is just from an obit that I found, and she looked like Mildred. She writes in 1968 the account of this years-long visitation from the ghost of Mark Twain, and he refers to her as daughter. And the ghost of Twain goes like shopping with her and reflects on like the Hale Holbrook performances, and he talks about the 1968 elections. He's just everywhere, and this is the sort of thing he writes to her. If you can hit it again. She writes, "Do you think I will ever be free to write?" This is her communicating with the ghost of Twain. And then Twain writes back, "Definitely. So, daughter, don't despair. You will write famous literature. You were needed for this life. You are the person I once was." I know. There is something so sad about these women and their yearning to produce a Twain who is fatherly and Christian and kind, and who doesn't have a racist bone in his body, who writes cute little quips, and who's kind of like middle of the road in terms of his politics, and who wants nothing more than to promote other people's writing. This is, right, this is not Mark Twain. Now, this is the epilogue for the book. But in a more serious way, it caused me to look at the ways in which serious scholars are no better than Eunice and Mildred and Emily. That we all construct the Mark Twain that we wish had lived, and we project him into the cultural space. And one of the things that I found as I researched the book, and I looked at all the things that he did not all the things, I lie a lot when I'm presenting things, some of the things he did not publish, and the works that he excised out of chapters. And what I found was, the person I already admired, which was a deeply complicated, very conflicted artist, struggling both to tell and not tell stories that he thought he should. And this is really in contrast to the Twain that shows up certainly in cultural sites. And I take a real sort of shot at Hannibal, which is just unfair, but I do it anyway. And the ways in which that space and the sort of Disneyfication of Twain is, I think, part of a dangerous trend in American culture. And it also is affecting the kind of teaching that we can do. And it's a huge disservice to Twain. If I need him to be the guy in the white suit, we failed. So the book ends up getting, very serious as it goes through some of these stories that he does not tell. But for those of you who don't want to go through horrible stories about American racism and patriarchy, just flip to the end, because that's fun. That's where you can meet these ladies. So that's the origin of the book.
So you began with the image of Mark Twain as a ghost speaking from the afterlife,
Yes.
but then the concept of the ghost itself sort of morphed
Yes.
into something else, or something deeper or more metaphorical. So then you began writing and thinking about what kind of ghosts haunted Mark Twain,
Yes.
the writer.
Yes.
And that's how the book, spoiler alert, how the book is organized, all right? Chapters devoted, for example, to the ghost of John Marshall Clemens,
yeah.
right? Mark Twain's father. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Mark Twain's relationship with his father and the ways in which he was haunted, both by his example and his memory of that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I wish I had written that earlier on in the book, because it would be much more clear to people what I was doing. But each of the chapters is organized around a ghost, and the first one is the ghost of John Marshall Clemens. And what I looked at, first of all, was the tension between the good little boy that we get in Tom Sawyer and this unbelievably violent, terrifying kind of monster in Tom Driscoll, who is a character in Pudd'nhead Wilson that Twain writes toward the latter portion of his career. And as you go through that, and I think I actually can't remember, Omar, what I have up here. I mean, there could be like pictures of family photos coming up. But if you could flip the next one, I'm not sure what I put up, because that'll jog my... okay.
Perfect.
There it is. Okay. And I think that one of the things that I think about in that first chapter is Twain's ambition to become the kind of man that his father couldn't be. Successful, important, wealthy, and this kind of generates the house that you guys honor here. At the same time, he marries Olivia, he writes Tom Sawyer, and those of you, I'm sure everybody in the audience here knows Tom Sawyer really well. If you think about it, it's very ambivalent about adult manhood. And I'm not the first person to say this. Judith Federley does a much better job than I do. But that Twain stops the growth of Tom, just as he approaches adolescence, in part because I think Twain himself is so ambivalent about what it means to be an adult white male in America. And I'd love to hear what Kerry has to say about this, because the figure of I, Joe, and I don't use any of the racial epithets that most of us scholars growing up and early in our careers used without thinking. I certainly did. But that character, I mean, Kerry's book is just stunning on contextualizing that character in Native American history. And I sort of absorb that, but then also look at him almost as a kind of kaleidoscope of all kinds of color and minority identities. And there's a way in which we start to sympathize with that character, as horrible as he is. So Twain ends up struggling with his own ambition. And as he writes, you start to feel the pressure to be what Leland Krauth calls the proper Mark Twain, right? And you think a little bit about this in the essay you wrote on the music box, right? That is, he's acquiring all this stuff, and he's becoming exactly the guy his father could never be, right? There's an undercurrent of resentment about the sort of white man that he's evolving into. And we feel that in the character of Tom at the end. He's getting a little darker and a little less trustworthy. And then I switched to Pudd'nhead Wilson, and I spent a lot of time at the Morgan Library and Museum, which was fantastic. It's in New York City. It has a great cafe. I loved it. But I looked at the entire manuscript of Pudd'nhead Wilson, and was like, what is it, 80,000 words?
I don't know.
I think the original was something like 80,000 words, and then he cuts it down to about 50. But in those cuts and X's, you find this really angry black man in Tom Driscoll. So we'll talk about this later, I'm sure. Like, you know, Twain knows there's some very angry men out there, black men, who would like to avenge themselves. And Tom Driscoll becomes a white-skinned black man who dreams of killing his white father. And all that is cut, or a lot of it is cut from the final manuscript. Mm-hmm. And so you see this, you know, deeply psychological trauma being worked out in that first chapter. I've got a couple more images for that, but I don't know if we want to go into those.
Well, it's up to you. What would you like to?
Flip ahead there. And again, Omar, I'm sorry about this. Okay. So I threw this in because in Tom Sawyer you have this moment where Judge Thatcher talks about how Tom will be a great and good man, like the proper Mark Twain, mm-hmm. right? And it's going to be forced on him. At some point, he's going to go to the military academy. He might become a great lawyer. He's going to become a great individual, and Judge Thatcher is going to make sure of it. I don't remember what I put after this. You can flip ahead.
There he is.
Yeah, but the novel is haunted by the specter of this guy. Would you like to say just a couple things about?
This is your show, not mine.
Just help a girl out.
Well, I guess what I would add is that the only sympathy that occurs in the novel for Injun Joe is after his demise. All right, as a living being, he is purely a menace who needs to be sort of extirpated from this community in order for people to be able to sleep, peacefully in their beds at night. All right. And then afterwards, there's this kind of nostalgia, that of victimhood. Right. But now, right, the sole remaining native inhabitant of the community of St. Petersburg is vanished, and order is restored as a result. I
feel like there's so many similarities between Tom Sawyer and this character that he ends up. So, Joe is a thief. So is Tom Sawyer. He's coerces underlings to do his bidding. So does Tom Sawyer. He dresses in costumes. So does Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as he's dead, you get this feeling that Tom realizes that maybe if he doesn't want to be on that guy's team, he's not entirely sure of the white team that he's joined. He's uncomfortable with the world that he's going to be stepping into. Okay, you can hit the next one. Again, I don't remember any of these. It was very late. Pudd'nhead Wilson, you have a Tom Sawyer come back in a much scarier form. And if you could flip ahead, those of you who don't know the novel, in it, Tom Driscoll is actually the son of an enslaved woman, and she switches her baby for the master's baby. So the light-skinned slave grows up as master. So this is, I can't even read this. I'm back here. Okay. So this is from the section that's most of it's cut from the novel. Some of it's reworked, I think, in the Century version. It was totally impossible for him, and the him here he's talking about is Judge Driscoll, this father figure, to deal ungently with a white person who appealed to him for a grace, even a costly one. But he and his ancestors had always been slaveholders, and habit and heredity had made it impossible for him to realize that a Negro was a human being. By name, he was that, but it was only a phrase. In reality, it meant no more to him than it would mean if one should call a horse a human being. As you can see on the left, all that's cut out. And you think of all the people who want to prove that the Twain never had a racist feeling. Wouldn't it be great if he had left that in? Like, why cut that from the novel? It's a really interesting twist. And this is the reason why, if you can go to the next one. So this is from a letter that John Marshall Clemens writes to his wife, Jane Lampton Clemens, in 1942 about collecting a debt from a farmer named Lester. First, he said, I could not have conscience to hold him to it. hit it again. Twain reflects, my father was a humane man. All will grant this who knew him. Still, proof is better than assertion. And I have it at hand. Before me is a letter, near half a century, dated January 5th, 1842. Go again. After he reads about John Marshall Clemens' leniency, Twain writes, is this not a humane and soft-hearted man? It's the same language. Hit it again. He reads on. Now, lower down the same page, my father, proven to be a humane man, writes this. I still have Charlie. The highest price I had offered for him in New Orleans was $50, and in Vicksburg's $40. After performing the journey to Tennessee, I expect to sell him for whatever he will bring. The editors at the Twain papers said, well, it's probable that Charlie was a horse because that's such a low price. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, Twain later on in the letter claims that Charlie was one of their enslaved members of their own family, but it doesn't matter because what he says is he sold him. You know, he treated no more than an ox, right? So his own father, he recognizes this unbelievable cruelty in his father, and I think we can all understand in a way why he doesn't quite represent it in the novel. I mean, how do you slay the father? 911, Dr. Freud. Now, how does he do this? So he's really in a bind.
And you know, just to speak to what you're talking about, the haunting and the ghosts. I mean, this is a full 50 years after the incident. You know, if you think Clemens is born in 1835, this happens in 1842, right? His father dies in 1847, and all of those decades later, he's still sort of reworking this in his mind. And that just kind of evokes for me, there is a very strange but evocative passage in Following the Equator, which is the 1897 travel log about what's called the World Lecture Tour, right, in which Mark Twain visited Australia, New Zealand, India, and then South Africa because of his personal bankruptcy. And so he was seeking to repay his creditors in full. And in India, he observes a servant being beaten, right? Yeah. And he talks about sort of the annihilating capacity of destroying space and time. Mm-hmm. And suddenly he's back, all right, in Hannibal, remembering his father cuffing a slave boy named Lewis, I believe, right? And Livy, you know, his longtime sort of staunch editor, said, "Oh, I hate to think of your father doing that. You know, can you somehow tame the language?" Right? Because, you know, remember with her abolitionist upbringing, right, and the divergence in terms of social class and wealth between the two of them, the thought of her husband's father, her father-in-law, whom she never met, of course, because he died long before their marriage, you know, beating, right, an enslaved member of the family was just too much for her to bear.
And it wasn't the first time.
Right.
So, I mean, this is
so these memories really do haunt him, and they resurface in sort of strange, bizarre ways, and then are often, as you argue in the book, then repressed or partially suppressed.
Yeah, and he, at the end of that passage that Kerry's talking about in Following the Equator, when the father has done this, he also remembers an incident where I think it's the same passage where I sometimes just make things up. Kerry corrects me, she's like, "No, Anne, that was not where that happened." But where the slave who was hit by a lump of iron and killed, you know, a quote master throws it at this man and kills him. And he says, well, the whole town felt bad about it, but of course no one said anything. And for me, that, of course no one said anything, I actually think, you know, everyone, again, wants Twain's primary interest to be in brotherhood between the races. I think his primary interest is in the cowardice of his own race, the failures of white America. You know, over and over again, I've had arguments with scholars who are really determined to salvage like the reputation of Jim. We have to prove that Jim is a noble character. I think Jim is Jim. You know, he is what he is. Read the book. He's you know, at times noble, at times he's represented in very offensive ways. He's both. Where Twain does his best work is when he turns his satiric lens on white people. And that's when he's really cooking with gas. You know, that's when we really know where his satire is aimed. And I think he would love to be able to sort of include this passage. And the other parts that are cut are moments where Tom Driscoll is really almost like a kind of, you know, a black nationalist, very much wanting to kill his white father specifically for the violation of creating him as a black man. Now, there's all kinds of racism that's written into that, but we're scared of Tom Driscoll in a way that I don't think we are scared of him in the novel that turns out, right?
Yeah.
So in the novel, it turns out he's just a terrible person. I mean, and we all know terrible people. We can name names. But we, as the white reader, if this version of Pudd'nhead comes out, we ought to all be a little scared, because there is a very angry black man waiting to knock at the door. But he, again, cuts that. So I think that gets me through John Marshall Clemens.
Well, then let's move on to Daniel Quarles, all right? Also affectionately known as Uncle Dan'l, all right? A very familiar figure in Mark Twain biography, best known, of course, as one of the primary models for the character of Jim in Huck Finn. You, however, have uncovered a fascinating backstory about Daniel Quarles.
I did?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. I was telling Kerry
and
today.
I am wondering
really remember what I wrote in the book.
If you would share that.
Is this like Harv? Which one are you talking about, Harv?
Anyone you want.
Okay. All right. So one of the things that again, I was talking with a colleague of mine who said, you know, wow, you're really going after Twain. And I'm not trying to take down Twain at all. In fact, I don't think we should. I think we should build him up and reveal him in his full humanity. But I am going after sentimental Twain lovers of Twain. And Uncle Dan'l is just, I mean, every time I hear like a grown person use the phrase Uncle Dan'l, I just want to smack him. His name is Daniel, and he's not your uncle, and stop it. So his name is Daniel, and he was, in all likelihood, I mean, I'm guessing at this part, but he was in the Quarles family, and the Quarles are the in-laws of the Clemens. John Quarles is married to Jane Clemens' sister.
Yes.
And so John Quarles is Sam Clemens' uncle. And he has a farm with about 30 enslaved people on it. And Twain scholars just get misty-eyed and, you know, moist in all kinds of ways when they think about the Quarles farm. So if we could just flip forward a little, I think, you can keep going. That's okay, we already talked about, so this is, I mean, everybody loves this image. This is actually John Lewis, a farmer in
Elmira.
Elmira, yeah. But this notion that Twain is there as the kind of, you know, like close friend of black folk, sure, okay, but like John Quarles isn't coming over for Christmas dinner, and a whole mythology starts to build up about Twain's life among enslaved people and how much he loved them. Twain is much better than most of the scholars that write about this, because he talks about the subtle line that prevents complete fusion between the white children and the black children. Like Twain doesn't lose track totally of this. But if we could flip ahead, I don't remember what I put in here. One of the things that happens is that on the farm, Twain hears stories from Daniel. One of them is called The Golden Arm. And it's a story about a woman who dies, and she has a golden arm, and she's buried, and her husband, you know, wants to dig her up and get that golden arm back. So he digs her up, and then in the middle of the storm, he starts to hear, who's got my golden arm? Who's got my golden arm? Who's got my golden arm? And finally, Twain would tell the story and jump out and say, you do, and everybody would lose control of themselves. And Daniel would tell this story to children at night, and they loved it, and he'd tell it over and over again. Well, as Twain starts to evolve as an artist, he's like, hey, that's a pretty good story. And he starts to tell that story in Black vernacular, and he refers to Daniel on stage, which is, giving him credit. He also has befriended, at this point, Joel Chandler Harris. And when you start to listen to the two of them write to each other and what they talk about, in the book I say they're like two white boys trading baseball cards, each telling stories about how they know Black folk better than the other one. And they refer to like my Missouri Black folk and have you ever heard this story? And you speak in the Black voice even better than I do. And you start to feel them cultivating Black culture in a way that we'll see Elvis do in years to come. And I don't want to say this is bad and absolute exploitation. I think it's very complicated. I think it's admiration, affection, exploitation, commodification. It's all those things at once. And he goes on stage and he performs this story for years and years and years. And he makes a lot of money. And it's one that people around the world love to hear him tell. Now, again, he does mention the name of Daniel. I think you could forward to the next thing. So, I mean, this is what we have here. We have white performers going on stage telling Black folklore. And they're being celebrated for their artistry. Well, you've got to be a little careful about this, right? I mean,
and their authenticity,
and
right?
Their authenticity,
right?
yes, exactly. If you could flip ahead, I think there's a picture that. You could go past this. This is just his. Oh, actually,
well,
this
might
go
be
back.
Well, go back to the Corals Farm.
I like telling Omar what to do. Go back, Omar. Okay, right here is good. I'm tired of reading. Would you read?
But this is just for some context. This is late, all right? This is from Mark Twain's autobiography. So he's looking back through the mists of time at this Edenic boyhood place of freedom and excitement, all right? So you have to be mindful of that as you don't get too swept up in the evocative language, is what I'm trying to say. It was a heavenly place for a boy, that farm of my Uncle John's. All the Negroes were friends of ours, and with those of our own age, we were, in effect, comrades. I say in effect, using the phrase as a modification. We were comrades, and yet not comrades. Color and condition interposed a subtle line, which both parties were conscious of, and which rendered complete fusion impossible. We had a faithful and affectionate good friend, ally, and advisor in Uncle Dan'l, a middle-aged slave whose head was the best one in the Negro quarter, whose sympathies were wide and warm, and whose heart was honest and simple and knew no guile. It was on the farm that I got my strong liking for his race and my appreciation of certain of its fine qualities. This feeling and this estimate have stood the test of 60 years and more and have suffered no impairment. The Black face is as welcome to me now as it was then.
Okay, now, there is no reason to question the sincerity of Twain's memory or his feeling. It's beautiful. But if I'm leaping ahead to other issues, but
okay.
If you stand in front of a group of students and you don't acknowledge that there's a patronizing quality to this, that the best head in the Negro quarter seems like a relative statement, that Twain's use of the word blackface resonates in some interesting ways, it would be much easier to teach this to students if you can say, look at how rich this is. That there's a thread in the middle of all this affection. There's still a kind of commodification and objectification of Black people that I believe he's utterly unconscious of, right? And what I love about Twain is that he does know a lot of his blind spots, and he can point to them. Now, scholars have just taken this and run with it, and they still do today. You can hear interviews happening today with some very prominent Twain scholars who are really committed to making sure that we never acknowledge and I think racism is one of the terms that they're struggling with. Call it racial blind spot, call it like a kind of racialist response, but that Twain is struggling with race as much as he's like a progressive in response to race. So look at what some, if you could hit it now. So this is Albert Bigelow Paine, who was just, he was a bad.
Mark Twain's first authorized biographer.
I like
actually lived in the house with him. He had unprecedented access.
Right. I actually said this in the book. How many people have seen All About Eve? He's Eve Carrington, right? That's it. Yeah. He's like, so he's the first great Mark Twain impersonator, you know, in some ways. So he says that the farm was just one long idyllic dream of summertime and freedom. Oh, ask Daniel about that. His tendency to mischief grew with this wide liberty, improved health, and the encouragement of John Quarles's good-natured, fun-loving slaves. I know. Okay, keep going. It gets better. I actually cut like 6 of these because. So this is 1952. Sam could not help contrasting Judge Clement's cold, formal reserve and the pinched little household in the Hannibal with Uncle John Quarles's warm, hearty country hospitality and the wonderful table over which he and Aunt Patsy presided, surrounded by their 8 happy children and a flock of enchanting slaves. This was the good life, right? Oh, let's move forward. Okay, now this is 2003. There, playing with his cousins, nurtured by the domestic warmth and comparative affluence of the Quarles household, his respect and affection for Black people flourished. They were a vital part of the farm's life, both in the house and in the fields. He never saw a Black person mistreated there, and never saw a Black person there who did not carry himself or herself with dignity and self-respect. How would you know? Like, what is that? And I really think that's only 2003. Like, you're telling me there wasn't one sort of whiny, difficult slave anywhere on the property? Everybody was just noble and transcendently good, and that they were not mistreated? Doesn't that fundamentally ignore the fact that they're enslaved? I mean, but I think, again, you know, I don't want to seem too high on my horse here, although it may be too late. As a white person, and certainly as a white teacher, when you're slogging through the 19th century, there's not a lot of good news, right? I mean, you're hoping for any port in a storm. So if you can find one moment where some white person kind of transcends their history and their community, you kind of leap for it. And I think that you see people overestimate those moments in a strange, sort of in the strange alchemy of teaching and writing. I mean, I want Mark Twain to be a hero too. But I don't do him service as a human being if I don't listen to the struggles of his life. And I think this is what's troubling. And there's work coming out in 2025 that's doing similar kinds of activity, you know, similar whitewashing, for lack of a better term. But I don't know what I put next. Go ahead.
What about, can you tell a little bit about the historical life of Daniel Quarles?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's. I think I put it in later on, and we can just scroll past it, but I just want to say it now that Daniel is, in 1855, John Quarles frees Daniel. At this point, John Quarles' first wife, Patsy, has died. The Civil War is on the horizon. And Daniel's over 50 years old at this point. Hannah, his wife, is blind. You're free. Good luck. And Daniel works for a while on Quarles's property, and then is essentially a day laborer for the rest of his life. What we don't hear anybody in the Clemens household reflect on is what happens to some of Daniel's children. So while Daniel is freed, his son James Harve Quarles is given to one of John Quarles' sons, who then sells him to a friend who takes him to Texas. And that child was probably 4 or 5 years old when Sam is sitting there listening to his father tell those stories. So James is probably familiar in some way with the young Sam Clemens. How do we know this? Because the workers, the WPA, the Writers Project, goes down and interviews any remaining living slaves in the 1920s, and Harve is one of them. And I think I have that forward. If you forward this, so one of the things that I wanted to point out is that a lot of these bios of Twain in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they're coming out at a time when lost cause histories are really being celebrated. We have the daughters of the Confederacy are building their monument to the Confederates in, Gettysburg. We have Birth of a Nation, the rise of Confederate emblems all over the country. You can go again. Oh God, I'm sorry. I guess this is where I start hitting Hannibal. Well, one of the things that happens in the Daniel chapter is that I start to really just lose my mind about.
Stop it.
Well, a little bit. I mean, what happens is that if scholars are doing it in biographies, the culture's doing it as well. So in the 1950s, earlier, we have National Tom Sawyer Days starts. One of the things they have is mud volleyball. Mallory, could you check to see if that's in the novel of Tom Sawyer? I don't think there's any mud volleyball. And it's great. Who doesn't want mud volleyball or face painting? I mean, that's fantastic. Flip to the next one. They also, and they build the Mark Twain Memorial Shrine. It's a shrine, and we've been there. I was there with some people here in this room. And it's scary. It's beautiful, lovely people. If we're live streaming, lovely, lovely people. This is me choking to death. One of the Tom Sawyer impersonators that they had there. They choose 2 kids from the 4th or 5th grade to be Tom and Becky, and this kid was such a nice kid. And I was like, "Would you mind if I choked you just for a photograph?"
And I think I took that photograph.
I was like, "Sweetie, come here.
Guilty as charged.
Come here." Okay, keep going. But the problem is that there are other stories that we're not telling. And I know that places I would be interested to hear Jeff and certainly the people who are running Hannibal, telling stories about people beaten by the Clemens family isn't really going to bring them in, I mean, that's a tough sell, but it is part of the history. We have Ralph Gregory, who was the first curator of the Mark Twain Shrine, who writes that the relationship between them, this is Daniel and James Quarles, was one of brotherly and man-to-man qualities and was not merely that of master and slave. This is a projection of what we would like to think. Okay, keep going. Keep going. We can look at that later. And again, keep going. I'm sorry. But this is the interesting thing. So this is from, in 1937, that's how late, Harve Quarles, he's in his late 90s. He's interviewed, and he says, "Massa Quarles, he live in Missouri, place called Floridas. He gave me to his son Ben, and he sold me to Master Charlie Quinot. Master Charlie come to Texas, but I don't know when. It's before the Freedom War. That all I know. My daddy named Dan, and my mammy, Hannah, she was blind." Okay, so keep going to the next one. He talks about patter rollers. So these would be white patrols in Texas, and you would get paid by the number of times that you whipped, a slave who was a free person, but they treated like slaves. who was out on the road. 39 licks with the nine tails, paddle-roller gets 50. And this is the song that they would sing. He follows you with this vignette. Run, N-word, run, paddle-roller caught you. How can he run? He got me in the woods and all through the pasture. White man run, but N-word run faster. Like his father, Harv Quarles has a ghost story to tell, in this case about white night riders who haunted the roads looking for black men and women. Quote, and when Massa tell us we free on Juneteenth, James Harvey Quarles declares, I leaves, I made a fiddle out of a gourd for freedom and learns to play it. I played for dances after, I's free. That's a great story, right? And I should say also that we know this in part because relatives of the Quarles have been researching this. So, or excuse me, Daniel's relatives. And I've got some of that in the book, the work that one man in particular has done to preserve that. And there also is in Hannibal, and I would want to give a shout out to the Huck Friend Freedom Center, Jim's Journey. Yeah. Where a work of a woman named Faye Dant, who's done incredible things to tell the stories of African Americans in and around Hannibal, and to kind of fill out the story of black people that surface in Twain's life. I mean, that place deserves a huge multi-million-dollar grant, and then you'd end up with a really cool place for white and black Americans to explore their
shared heritage. Yeah.
So yeah, if the president's watching this live stream and there's some extra money, Okay, go ahead. Let's keep going. Okay, done. That one
we're done?
Done with that one.
Okay, all right. Okay.
We're through. That's the good stuff there. Yeah. Other than, wait, there's one other thing. Yeah. Twain going to the church on Pearl Street. Mm-hmm. So the Pearl Street, the AME church that is now, I think, the Metropolitan Methodist Church, and you've got this gorgeous brick building here in Hartford, right? His butler, George Griffin was a deacon there, and I think Kevin McDonald has done a lot on that. And Twain goes one day as a fundraiser, and he performs the stories of Uncle Remus before an all-black audience. And he writes to William Dean Howells about what fun it is to be the only white person performing in front of this all-black audience. And I'm sure it was fun. I'm wondering how the audience felt about it, having him do in black vernacular, telling stories in black voice in front of a black audience. On the one hand, I think that they were probably very grateful to have this incredible, superstar raising some money for their church. But he does sort of treat it like a charm on his charm bracelet, like look at me. So I know. I really do like Mark Twain, by the way. I don't want you to think. Go ahead.
Well, you've covered some of this, but I do want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the character of Jasper. I mean, you've alluded to this notion of the angry black man,
yes.
Right? Who appears marginally in Huckleberry Finn, right? When Huck says there's this, black man in the woods, I'm scared he's going to cut out my livers,
Yep.
right? I don't want to go back there, right? But can you just explain a little bit more about
when you look at images of black men in Twain's fiction, they are for the most part subservient, maternal, kind, wonderful father figure in Jim, and these are all noble qualities. Anger, he's comfortable seeing black women get angry, but the anger of black men doesn't get represented much at all. There is one character, there's a shadow of a character, as Kerry just said in Huck Finn. There's the black man in the woods, right? That threatens Huck. Huck tells this story. He makes it up. And it's interesting how quickly that story comes to Huck. And the white boy he's telling it to is like, oh yeah, I got to be very careful. Mm-hmm. And at the as Jim is, fleeing, trying to save his life, all of the people on the farm are gathered around, sort of guns and, hatchets in hand, because they're sure, as one of the characters says, that there is a raft of Africans out in the woods. Sister Hotchkiss talks about this. So that figure, we know Twain must sense, and this comes up in the next chapter, that there could be some payback sometime coming. And in a work that he doesn't publish, called Which Was It?, which is just terrible. I mean, it's just, it's so bad. I mean, there was like some Jamesons next to my bed as I was trying to read that. So there are many reasons he did not publish that. But there is a long vignette in which a character named Jasper, who is sort of angry, his mother has been murdered by his, quote, white master father, and he has worked his way into the employment of this man whose name is, I can't believe this is his name, George Harrison. I feel so bad about that. I almost wanted to just say, could we just call it some other name? But it's George Harrison.
I feel the same way about Tom Driscoll, by the way.
I know, but
hands down, Twain's most villainous character. No relation of mine.
But so George Harrison, he is a murderer, and Jasper has witnessed this murder. And he's able to turn the tables on George Harrison, his master, and promises that he will not turn him in if George Harrison signs over his life to Jasper, essentially making him the slave and Jasper the master. And there are it's some of the most powerful writing that Twain does, I think, about slavery, because he describes Jasper suddenly sort of this full sense of his manhood and his power comes into his body, sort of, changes everything about him. And George Harrison sort of becomes this meek, groveling character. And Kerry's spent a little time with Percival Everett, and his novel came out, of course, like 2 months before my book was supposed to come out, and I included a reference to it. But it's almost like Twain knew Percival Everett was coming, that at some point the character that he writes in that book, who is going to get his freedom one way or another, who knows how to spell the word retribution, I think was it, right? He knows what that means. Twain knows it's coming too. And again, that's not something he publishes.
I don't know, how are we doing for time? Because I've got one more question I want to ask.
Yeah,
just a few more minutes? Yeah. Okay. Well, it's the most complicated question I saved for last, so sorry.
The meaning of life.
Personally, Chapter 4, entitled The Ghost of Mark Twain, I think it's the most provocative chapter of the book. And in that chapter, you argue that there is a tension between Twain's reticence to speak the truth and an equally powerful force, the unwillingness of the audience to hear it. Yeah. And then a few paragraphs later, you reframe it this way: the truths Twain struggled to reveal and the cultural imperative to keep those truths buried. So could you talk a bit about the cultural imperative and that sort of conflictedness that he wants to tell these stories? He struggles to tell them, and then sometimes sort of, I don't want to use the word backpedals, but, will either suppress something or in the case of, say, at one point, Anne tells a great story about Twain was on fire just to write a book about lynching. Right? I mean, he writes these very powerful letters, get me all of this information, I'm going to write a multi-volume book about this. And then, like, what is it, 3 days later, 2 days later, he says, oh, I can't do that. I wouldn't have a friend in the South left, right, if I did, And then, so he feels things very strongly, and intensely, but then backs away. Right? Yeah. And so the United States of Lyncherdom, which is indeed a very powerful essay, was written but not published during
published.
his lifetime.
Not published during his lifetime, and when it was published, Terry Ogle has done work on this. It was published in sort of a bastardized form.
Yes, yeah.
And so his editors, again, were like, oh, no, that's not the kind of Twain we want out there. And so they cut it out. But I think the best way to answer this, as I was doing research, and in the last chapter, I talk a lot about the way that Twain's legacy is manipulated by people who claimed that they cared about him. Albert Bigelow Paine is one, and he edited Twain's last work, Mysterious Strangers, that was a little softer, a little less atheistic, a little less nihilistic. But then we're all doing it. As soon as Twain dies, there are all these cartoons with Uncle Sam mourning next to Twain's grave.
And those illustrations are included in the book, and they're fascinating cultural documents.
So I started doing a little research on the banned book list, and I have my niece Jean Marie is here. I'm so proud of her. She's a librarian in Westport. But he's really not on the top 20 banned book list anymore. And one of the reasons is no one's reading him. You don't have a banned book that nobody's reading, and he's not on most required reading lists for middle, and certainly I wouldn't teach him to a middle school student, I don't think, but high school. And I can tell you that most, we struggle to get graduate students interested in the work of Mark Twain. And part of the reason is that we have done such a great job as a culture of convincing everyone that he is a white savior, that he is an embodiment of the American flag, that he's a grandfatherly old wit who loves cats and cigars. And so we miss out on this tornado of a human being, and we have written him into a kind of I said at one point that I went looking for ghosts, but what I found was a kind of corpse, and we're doing it because we're afraid of looking at the truth. And I think if you look at Twain's fiction, so often he's writing about cowards.
Yeah.
He's writing about people who run away. He's writing about the struggle to be a better person. He's writing about moments of crises of conscience when characters know what they should do but can't. Well, he's writing about himself, he is I love this part of him. That he is someone who is profoundly sort of conflicted and knows what he should do and occasionally doesn't. So the same year that he does not publish United States of Lyncherdom, which again I'm more frustrated with the critics that have set up this critical tradition. You can Google it, and people are like, oh, this is this unbelievable work that condemning lynching in America, except he didn't publish it. And you can't not mention that part. He had been reading about some of the most, I actually struggled. I'm glad we didn't get to this part. He knew that there were people being lynched in ways that any lynching, horrible, but the kind of pleasure that people seem to be taking in it. He's reading all these accounts. He's gathering them. He's got all the data. He says, at some point, I will live to see a Negro lynched in, I think he doesn't say Times Square, but Union Square with 10,000 people gathered around. And then at the end of that letter, he says, I can't publish this. I wouldn't have a friend left. I wish I could think of the right man to do it, because it should be done. Mm. If it's not Mark Twain in 1905, who is it? Ida B. Wells, Stephen Crane, Jacob Riis, you've got all kinds of people who are trying to push back. Now, I think that students in particular would respond much better to that kind of muddy Twain than to this icon that we're putting up. In fact, I know they do. I teach Twain regularly. I teach Twain next to Ida B. Wells and next to Paul Laurence Dunbar and next to W.B. Du Bois. So put him in context, let him be a human being, stop dressing him up in the white suit, and maybe people start reading him again. So that's that.
Omar, do we have time for some questions, or?
A couple questions.
So.
I can't see, there's a light. It
Yeah,
might be
very-
like the ghost of Mark Twain looking at me right now. He's very angry with me.
If not questions, maybe comments, thoughts? Yes.
I have two, actually. One is do you think there's any plan, or have you heard anything about publishing a book about the original manuscript of Moyne College?
Well, the California edition, for the first time, does reprint the Morgan manuscript, right? So it goes the Morgan manuscript, the Century, the serialized version of Pudd'nhead Wilson, and then what we know of as the American book publishing final, book copy of Pudd'nhead. But that's come out very, very recently, for the first time.
Yep.
Second one is I'm interested in what both of you think, because I've heard a lot about this over the years, about Livy doing censorship of some of his writing, and people having different feelings about that, and some saying, like, oh, she did him such a disservice, and kind of being mad at her for trying to censor him, and then others having different view. How do you both look at that?
You want to answer
Well,
first?
I think when it came to really censoring Mark Twain, you're not going to be able to do it. I think she polished him. I think there were times that she certainly convinced him to tone things down a little bit. But if you're talking about when he really had a desire to say or do something, I think he did it. That's just my feeling, though. I'm just making that up and guessing. Let's have Kerry answer it instead.
I just want to sort of harken back to what Anne was talking about in terms of a cultural imperative. I think that story, as it kind of took root, is very much about our patriarchal culture, right? So that you have this incredible wild male genius, right? And then this prim, proper, prudish Victorian woman who tames him, who emasculates him. This reaches its sort of fullest expression in Van Wyck Brooks's, The Ordeal of Mark Twain, right? Where he would have been a greater writer had he not been, right, married to Olivia. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think he counted on her in lots of ways, to be a sounding board for him. And, those stories that we all know about, up in the study at Quarry Farm, where he would deliberately put in stuff, right, that he knew would provoke, Livy and Susan Crane on the porch when it was read aloud that night. He delighted in that. He reveled in that, So there's this, one of the things that fascinates me about Mark Twain is sort of the solitude, the solitary nature of the writing, all right? But then the way it gets translated into a dynamic oral storytelling component, and that was so essential to his art. So I don't think that she cramped or confined him.
And even like that thing that he would do, remember, he's a stand-up comic. And so, stand-up comics are terrible human beings in some way, right? Because they're going to go for a joke, and they don't care who gets hurt. If I can land that joke, and I can get that laugh, I'm going to go for it. So one of the things that's kind of funny about that is that he enjoyed seeing her a little upset. That's classic stand-up comic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let me see what I can do here. And again, that's one of the ways that we do a disservice by not teaching him as this working stand-up comic who the term stand-up wouldn't have meant anything to him, but a comic who delights in that explosive moment of transgression when everybody's shocked and laughs. Doesn't matter what the joke is.
Oh, shucks.
I think your book is going to be so helpful for us that we're here.
I hope so.
It's something that is very difficult to do, is to break that cultural of how
Yeah.
Right.
But I think you're right, is that what's great about him is how many flaws he has.
Yes.
And by studying
Yes.
that, it just is so important to think through.
Oh,
Yes.
thanks.
Yeah. I want to close with a Mark Twain quote, all right, which is one of my favorites. Every man in his own person is the whole human race, without a detail lacking. I am the whole human race, without a detail lacking. I have studied the human race with diligence and strong interest all these years in my own person. In myself, I find in big or little proportion every quality and every defect that is findable in the mass of the race. What a coward every man is, and how surely he will find it out if he will just let other people alone and sit down and examine himself. The human race is a race of cowards, and I am not only marching in that procession, but carrying a banner.
I really should have put that in the book. I think I put the last line in. Okay. This has been fun.
Thank you.